Hello there, this is a video to warn the residents of Dorset and citizens of the UK that we are or fast becoming victim to what can only be described as a massive cancer scam. And this has come to my attention after being the victim of a sustained intensive campaign of terrorism that's been inflicted or directed at me by some very well organised thugs, which I have in front of me here. Now, this has all been triggered by a recent altercation between myself and my neighbour. This is Sara Armstrong down here, who clearly appears to be working in cahoots with all these nutcases and abusive, shallow psychopaths is the best way I can describe them, because quite seriously, from the behaviour that they have displayed, they quite honestly don't have any heart or any empathy for other human beings, other than perhaps people that remind them of themselves. But the nature of this altercation was quite surprising, because basically Sarah has been my neighbour here for about 11 years. This is in a street in Bournemouth, and as I say, not said a single word to me in 11 years, and then all of a sudden comes up to me and calls me a scumbag. This is after about 17 years of abuse from her and her friend. This is this pair here, as I say, she formed a sort of alliance with my son's mother, this woman here, Anita Fairbairn, who very clearly appeared to drive her own father to take his own life, has a very suspicious background, which I've been investigating recently, and I've found a lot of evidence of foul play in the suicide of her father, and a lot of inconsistencies in her stories. As I say, they formed a duo, a kind of team, to form a base, of or a platform rather, that they could use to terrorise me. This is back in 2003, 17 years ago. And as I say, this has been going on now for an extremely long period of time, which is depicted on this little chart here of my life, this little timeline. 2003 down here, this is the green line, indicating the terrorism I've been subjected to since 2003, and the yellow line, an intensification of this terrorism to include suicide, incitement and isolation of my son. Really dark, evil, macabre practices, which quite honestly are completely illegal, and nobody really quite understands actually at the moment how these people have got away with it for so long, because there have been regular murder attempts. I mean, this all kicked off with a murder attempt by this guy Dan Marshall right here in 2003. There was another murder attempt performed by another chap here called Asher Osmondson here in 2012. Whole string of other physical assaults that's happened in the meantime, and all culminated with this very strange insult that was levelled at me by Sarah just a few days ago, which basically signified this sort of climax of 17 years of abuse, like a sort of full stop. Now, this all occurred just outside my property when my neighbours were having a sweet little lunchtime tea party, or as part and parcel, I don't know, of a sort of neighbourhood social occasion, and trying to be as friendly as possible. I took part, and when sat down, here I am here, this is me here, sitting in a chair here, this is my neighbours sat around, and one of my neighbours, of course, Sara Armstrong, stood here, who was present for about 15 minutes, didn't say a single word throughout this whole exchange and chat that I had with the neighbours. And she got up, and this is her children sitting here, Alfie and Maya, I think. And she just gets up to leave, and then suddenly comes up to me and looks quite nervous and stutters out this strange insult. So it's like, "Oh, Crispin, you're a scumbag." I was like, "Oh my god!" And then just carries on into this other string of insults at me. Seems really quite anxious. Obviously, clearly has very little idea what she's talking about. She's not spoken to me in 11 years. Of course, she knows absolutely nothing about my background, or not that much. Very little about my current situation. I mean, so working on third-hand information she's heard via lots of other people, but it's obviously very dated information as well that relates to sort of things that were going on decades ago. Absolutely nothing to do with what's happening now. So yeah, that all of a sudden brought to our attention that there's some very disturbing things happening here. And the nature of this abuse that I've suffered is really very worrying, because I just briefly like to point out what's going on in the background here. I've been a victim of sinus cancer, and I can just bring this up very quickly on this chart here. This is my sinus cancer ordeal that started in 1995. Indicated by the red line here, going up to I'm very pleased to report actually it's all been subsiding the past few months. I'm feeling much better, but it's still been the best part of 25 years that this ordeal has gone on. And very clearly, obviously got a lot to do with why these people are organising so much terrorism and intimidation against me, quite simply because I have exhibited health challenges basically, and health problems which they consider is good reason to just lay into me basically, and use me as a target for all their abuse. Now, so just quickly explain here, this is part of a much bigger, wider cancer charity scam, which has come to my attention quite simply because I found cures to this horrible illness. And it's also come to my attention in certain terms that if we hide the cures and suppress the cures, as everyone's doing with all this business of intimidation and terrorism, etc., then there can be only one possible outcome, of course, and that is to let the disease run riot across somebody's face and produce all these horrific mutilations, which, as I say, seems to be the sole purpose and sole intention, goal of this terror campaign here. Just to suppress cures, make sure that they're beaten back, all these murder attempts and etc., all had a specific purpose, to mutilate these people's faces. So I think it's high time that these people actually were arrested, that the people here, organising this campaign, the people in this picture up here, have been breaking the law. It is all completely illegal. They have no ground whatsoever to stand on. If they were all brought into a court of law, I have enough evidence here to lock them up for an extremely long period of time. There's no doubt about that at all. So I think that something needs to be done about this very urgently. As I say, there are terrific improvements that could be made on this situation, and it's clearly all part of a huge global cancer charity scam suppressing cures for sinus cancer so they can use the disease to cause maximum damage, in order to use the mutilated victims to collect ever increasing amounts of money to look for cures, when in truth they use the money to suppress them and beat anyone to death for exposing them. It's absolutely sickening, really, and it really beggars belief these people have got away with it for so long. Really, it's nothing more than the most degrading, disgusting crime on the planet, and it needs to be addressed very urgently. And I should thank actually Sara Armstrong for bringing this to my attention, because as I say, Sarah and Anita began a hate campaign against me when they met in 2003, clearly motivated by my cancer issues, head injuries and disabilities, a clear example of extreme disability racism, judging and terrorising people for their health issues. It's the most shallow, disgusting, degrading behaviour on this planet, and these two, for a start, really need arresting. Quite simply, this altercation and this ridiculous string of insults on the back of all this 17 years of terrorism is one of the most awful stories I've ever heard in my life, of abuse and of unwarranted intimidation and unjustified terrorism. It really is one of the worst I've ever heard. And as I say, I have all the evidence here that murders have been taking place regularly. People have been beaten to death. This is not made up. This is all completely genuine. And